I've just been joined in the studio by Yves Bertoncini, who is, as I said earlier, the president of the Mouvement Européen here in France. Yves, you're very welcome to the programme today.
Thank you.
In the beginning, we were looking at statements that were made today by Michel Barnier before we were joined by Gulliver about he's opening up saying, well, it seems following a briefing of the 27 national EU ministers that there's general approval of this draft Brexit divorce arrangement. Now, firstly, let's have a look at it like this. I mean, with the roller coaster ride in Westminster that we saw last week, the resignation of 3 ministers from Theresa May's cabinet all over this Brexit deal that she put at the table, and of course her as British Prime Minister hanging and fighting on for her political survival, will Barnier's comments today actually be of any help to her?
Well, I hope so. I must say that the situation is difficult since we have Shakespeare in London. Well, with Michel Barnier in Brussels, you have Descartes. I mean, a kind of more rational approach of the situation. You have mentioned the divorce. I mean, this divorce has been decided by the British people. The Europeans have no other choice than accepting it. And now we are facing, from the European perspective, and I think as well from the British one, an exercise of damage control, damage limitations, which have led to this agreement, draft agreement. The hope of the people in Europe, in the continent, is to have this agreement ratified at Westminster. But I mean, this is all about what will happen in London and elsewhere in the next few weeks.
Exactly, and the DUP, who are the tail wagging the dog from Northern Ireland. But, I mean, Barnier did underline that the EU will still now have to decide about the internal process for agreeing an extension to this transition period that is being looked after for after the March 29th deadline. But today's statement, is it a move in the right direction? Are we kind of a step away now from a no-deal Brexit that would really, I mean, have pretty horrific repercussions around the whole of Europe?
Yes, of course, if there is no deal, which is still a possibility, if this agreement is not ratified at Westminster, that would be the so-called cliff edge effect, meaning the UK overnight being considered as a simple WTO country, you know, with the same status, meaning no freedom of exchanges, trade exchanges, free movement of people overnight. And it would be a very, very damaging shock. So that's why this agreement has a first advantage, which is to have a so-called implementation period, transition period, till the end of 2020. So it would mean that actually nothing changes, except the fact that the Brits are not members any longer. They have no seats, they have no voice, and they still comply with EU rules. But it's for a limited period. So in this context, what Barnier is saying is that maybe to do what will be the most difficult part of the negotiation, meaning to imagine the next relation, the future relation, to draft a trade agreement, a security agreement. Since today we only have very broad political guidelines, we will need time. And Barnier is saying maybe we will need more than 1.5 years, maybe a bit more. I'm not sure if this is very helpful for Theresa May, to be honest, because this transition period must be short. She has to say, well, we had to accept this temporarily, but it won't be that long to have a very final Brexit, which will come in 2021. So if Barnier is saying now it will be maybe 2022, it's a bit difficult to hear from London, and not only from the hardest Brexiters.
Indeed, well, she has to get her ducks in a row. But now, moving maybe away from the Brexit side of things, but more in a kind of a France international realm. I mean, you're touching on security there. Emmanuel Macron came under fire last week from US President Donald Trump for mentioning a European army to protect the bloc from a resurgent Russia and an unsympathetic US administration. Is, in your opinion, an EU army a good deal? I mean, it sounds like a logistics nightmare, and the question of sovereignty, of course, will always come to the fore. And I mean, with the pattern of populism in Europe at the moment, that could really blow up in one's face. Is that true?
Yes, but I mean, this is all about geopolitics. You know, it's an old story. I mean, the European Defence Community was a French project, a very old French project in the 50s, but the French Parliament rejected it. So instead of having a European army, we have had NATO with national armies in the framework of this transatlantic alliance. Today, what we have is a quite dangerous neighborhood in Europe. Well, you have just mentioned Russia, Ukraine, of course, the chaos in Iraq, Syria, in Libya, in Sahel, Islamic terrorism. Well, we are scared. And not only we are scared as Europeans, but also our traditional protector, Uncle Sam, Uncle Donald, is not reliable any longer. Is not reliable any longer. I mean, there's a doubt. So, as Angela Merkel has said, we need to take our destiny into our own hands. The problem is that it takes a lot of time to build an army, if not an army, I mean, to build military capacities, and then we are in the middle of this situation in Europe. I think the perspective is good, but it will take time, and we don't have much time.
But what about the future of NATO? I mean, that's been kind of called into question specifically by the funding, and Donald Trump, this is his real flea in his ear about people ponying up the right amount of money to actually make NATO functioning. But can we agree, I still have Gulliver Cragg, who's our Eastern European correspondent on the line, but first to Yves, can we agree that NATO did overplay its hand in expanding eastwards, spooking Moscow?
Well, the paradox is that the Cold War was won by the Western part, let's say, and then we could have said at that time NATO was there to resist Soviet Union pressure. Soviet Union is dead, then we don't need NATO any longer. But yes, for diplomatic reasons, there was this extension. Together with the EU extension, by the way, there was a kind of race between the two. NATO for security and the EU for economic reasons. And then, yes, this extension till the Baltic countries was perceived, well, let's say, quite negatively by the Russians. That is true. But on the other side, this is not a justification to annex Ukraine or Crimea, of course.
And Gulliver, if you're still on the line there, how is NATO viewed now in a post-annexation Ukraine at the moment?
I can't remember the exact figures, but basically there was never majority support in Ukraine for joining NATO until the annexation of Crimea and the outbreak of war in Donbass. And now there is. I think basically consistently there's a small majority of Ukrainians who think that it would be a good idea for the country to join NATO, though I think that, that's all rather hypothetical because NATO is not likely to allow a country that's already at war to join. But if Russia was hoping that its interventions would make Ukraine more likely to return to the Russian fold, it seems to have had the reverse effect in terms of popular opinion, though it's worth stressing it's never a huge majority. It's never an overwhelming majority of Ukrainians that favour joining NATO. It's a slim majority, but I think it's a pretty consistent slim majority in favour.
OK, and over to Yves now, looking ahead to Europe-wide elections next year. What's the turf war? What's being campaigned upon? And also, is mobilising or dynamising the electorate going to be a challenge?
This is still a challenge to mobilize the electorate, simply as in any federal elections. Look at the USA, look at Switzerland. The EU has limited powers, actually. Then people, are coming and they vote, but half of them, more or less, a bit less in Europe, around half of them in the USA or in Switzerland. This time is a bit different, let's say, because precisely the geopolitical context is dangerous, simply.
Sure.
There are perils all around us, plus our traditional ally, the USA, not only, pressing us, really. So then, normally, if the campaign focuses on external challenges, normally, it can be a good campaign, by the way, and maybe there could be a sense in unity. There could be an appeal to voters to say, well, let's reinforce this union, let's vote in any case, but maybe including for pro-European forces. And
speaking of external forces, former Trump campaign manager Steve Bannon has thrown his hat into the ring, calling on Europe's far right to unite against, the powers that be in Brussels. In your opinion, how much of a threat is his presence on the European political circuit?
Yeah, it's the most damaging threat comes from the US administration itself, because we have heard some ambassadors in Central Europe, US ambassadors, having very negative words against the EU. The same was true for Donald Trump from time to time. So this is far more dangerous. Well, as far as Bannon is concerned, he will try to unite nationalists, which is very, very difficult. You know, we have had a international of socialists, but the international of nationalists is quite challenging to build. So, of course, there can be common points between them. There could be a kind of progression. There was a progression already in 2014, so a progression, but they won't win the election. But the ideas, their ideas, could influence mainstream parties, and that would be not an institutional victory, but a political one.
Indeed, and the elephant in the room, of course, the potential for Russian meddling. I mean, is that something that's being considered and or being dealt with at the moment?
That is the problem for the EU and the Europeans at large today. Normally, I mean, the founding fathers of Europe, the European construction, were Stalin, we were scared, and Truman. Yeah. But Truman was pushing us towards unity. Today, Putin, yes, we are scared, but Trump is not pushing us towards unity, or he has a very awkward way to do it. And sometimes he said the European Union is a problem for his administration. So we have these external pressures. You can add UK's external pressure, because UK did not manage to divide us in the first phase of Brexit negotiation, but we'll try to do it in the second phase. And you could even add China. So if you have these 4 permanent members of the Security Council trying to divide us, I'm afraid they could manage to do this. If we are not aware of the strength of our unity, the interest we have, we are only 6% of the world population, to be more united simply because it's our interest our interests are at stake, our values are at stake. I think Emmanuel Macron is trying to push in this direction. Angela Merkel probably is okay with this, sure. But I mean, the challenge now in front of us and ahead of this European election is to know whether there will be a massive popular support for this more unitary vision of Europe.
And we hope that will be the case. Yves Bertoncini from the Mouvement Européen here in France, thank you very much for joining us today. And Gulliver Cragg, our Eastern Europe correspondent, thanks for joining us on the line today.
Thank you.